Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, August 14th, 2019. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, California counties, the first to sue the Trump administration on their new public charge rules. Other states and counties lining up to do so. Meanwhile, the Epstein guards slept through their bed checks, falsified records, and someone posted his death on 4chan before anyone else knew. Meanwhile, Bill Barr attacks criminal justice reform prosecutors and unshackles the unshackled on police brutality. The Chinese military amasses on the border and denies entry of 2 U.S. warships into the Bay of Hong Kong, or the harbor of Hong Kong, as protests continue. Trump launches a direct assault on immigration judges. And a new book alleges the Kochs funded the third way to push trade on Democrats, and I imagine a lot of other its policies. Trump punts on some China tariffs as the economy starts to wobble. Stacey Abrams launches a group to fight voter suppression, eschews a presidential campaign, but open to vice presidential. And the EPA advises Newark residents to stop drinking their lead-tainted water. All this and more on today's program. Welcome, folks, to the show. Michael is back. You all remember him, Michael Brooks. What is it? Is that an Adidas outfit that you're wearing or no?
Well, the jacket is from Adidas,
okay,
and the shirt is not.
Right, I understand. But
actually, I need to. My friend Justin sent me a whole box of these from this company in LA, so I'll get you the name of this t-shirt company soon.
Great. That sounds great.
It is. I want to obviously fast track that.
No, I'm sure that is going to be promoted.
Indeed.
Jamie is here, obviously, and Brendan is here as well. Matt is out for the day. We've got a bunch of stuff to cover. The administrative assault on our government continues by the Trump administration. We'll go over a couple of those things that we had mentioned in headlines over the past couple of days. Want to go a little bit further in depth into the new public charge laws. But, I want to talk about this first because I was on the Hear the Burn podcast a couple of weeks ago and was talking about the press, in general, and but specifically in terms of the coverage of Bernie Sanders. And we don't go through this too much on this program because I think there's broadly a fairly sophisticated. If you've made your way to this program, you already have a fairly jaded perspective, I think, of the corporate news. And if you've been listening to this program, since its inception on Air America, then you certainly do. And it's warranted. We never dug up the name of that reporter from Politico, Michael, who called, and I tell this story now almost weekly, it feels like, of when a Politico reporter called in the spring of 2015 because he was doing a story on Martin O'Malley, and the way he said it to me, Martin O'Malley wants to know how he can get progressive support away from Elizabeth Warren. And I was like, Elizabeth Warren, she's not running. He's got to worry about Bernie Sanders. And the guy just laughed. Literally laughed. And I'm like, I'm being serious. Let me just double check that name.
Yeah,
Let me double check that name.
But
But I mean, and it's largely irrelevant who the guy specifically was, because this is the mentality that the largely hashtag not all reporters and journalists have towards Bernie Sanders and more broadly toward the left, but also I think there's a specific quality that they have a problem with. Because when I think back to the Dean campaign, Howard Dean, he was perceived in many respects as the leftist, the most left of that 2004 primary field. But I'm not quite sure that that's an accurate assessment of his politics. And he was governor of Vermont. He was a fairly conservative, I don't want to say conservative, but within the context of the Democratic Party, a conservative when it came to many issues in Vermont, but he happened to be anti-war. But the other element of the Dean campaign was that he was one of the first candidates to harness what was at that time a nascent online presence. We didn't have social media nearly in the way. I don't even think we had the term social media per se, except for in academic circles at this point. MySpace may have been around, but I don't think people perceived it that way. Facebook wasn't particularly ubiquitous. But there was a lot of internet-based organizing, and there was a lot of small donors. In fact, that was one of the first, as far as I can tell, real big small donor campaigns that used the internet. In fact, it was probably the first of the big that used the internet. And there was a resent by the press to the inclusion of a lot of newbies, essentially, and a lot of activists who did not have the pedigree that they had. And by the pedigree, I don't even necessarily mean education or aristocratic background. It really is just sort of like there was a lot of resent towards people who were smart and dedicated and excited.
Oh, I remember my friend's mom had some kind of chocolate dessert party for Howard Dean.
Right. I mean, there was, but beyond that, I'm talking specifically about the people that they had to bump up against. People who were challenging their particular story and narrative that they wanted to tell about politics.
And was that primarily Iraq as the fulcrum at that point?
Well, I mean, it was Iraq, but it was broader. It was a much broader palette of things. I mean,
just partisanship?
that's what brought. Well, just the whole notion of politics. Understand, with the blogs was the first time that people in the media had their voices questioned in any fashion whatsoever. Because for years they had the ability to go on cable television and they can't hear people yelling at the TV, and other people can't hear individuals yelling at the TV. They had the ability to write stuff, and the only way to rebut what a reporter would write at that point, and remember, the left had no mass media. Air America was the first even vague taste of criticism that these media reporters got from the left that was in any way organized. And then all of a sudden these blogs show up and people get really offended. Hey, wait a sec, you're questioning and they're getting embarrassed and they don't like it. And there is still remains, although to a certain extent it's diminished without a doubt, this divide. And there is a resent of Bernie, not just, I think, because of his politics, although I think there's there's probably a connection between his politics and the sort of the nature of the political movement around him that irks them. And certainly in 2016, there was a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters who could be obnoxious online and who were difficult. That comes with the territory. We're all adults here, right? And
was there a candidate who didn't have some difficult supporters?
Well, I mean Martin O'Malley, and so anyways, the point is that there is already this sort of low grade hostility, and look, let's be honest. You can look at the reporters and see where where the hostility comes from. There is a class element to this, and there is a insider-outsider element to this. And there's a lot of overlap in those groups, but so here is a story from Brian Williams on the 11th hour, and there's two aspects of this. It's coming out of, let's play the clips of Bernie Sanders talking about Amazon and Washington Post, because Bernie Sanders has been talking about the coverage and the nature of the questions that he's getting, which are all, and we saw this during the debates, and he wasn't certainly the only person who made this complaint during the debates. He just did it in a way that gets more attention, maybe. But we saw this in the debates, which is that the framing of these questions are being framed from a right-wing perspective. If I ask about immigration, there's 4 different ways, there's 20 different ways that I can ask about the same issue of immigration, but ask it in ways that are leading in one direction or another. And certainly, if it's up to me, I'm going to lead in a way that is framed by the left. And I imagine if Sean Hannity is doing it, he's going to lead by a frame of the right. But when you're doing a debate with Democrats, what is the point? It's for Democrats to figure out who they want to vote for. What is the point for boxing them in on a Republican frame, unless you are already taking this primary to the general election as a reporter? Because they don't do it on the right. I mean, it's just simply they don't. And we'll see it whether it's in the questions of abortion or the question we won't see these debates this time around, but we've seen it in the past. So here's Bernie Sanders he's not broadly attacking the media. He is specifically criticizing the type of coverage he's getting and the nature of the coverage, which politicians, like I said, there was multiple people who said this, who made these comments during the debates. But here he is, and he ties Bezos into this. But listen carefully, because he's being accused of creating some type of conspiracy, as if Jeff Bezos calls up people in the office and says, don't do this.
Anybody here know how much Amazon paid in taxes last year? Yeah. See, and I talk about that all of the time, and then I wonder why the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon, doesn't write particularly good articles about me. I don't know why.
We have pointed out over and over again that Amazon made $10 billion in profit last year. You know how much they paid in taxes? You got it, 0. Any wonder why the Washington Post is not one of my great supporters? I wonder why. New York Times, not much better.
Now, so that's basically the evidence that Bernie Sanders is peddling some type of conspiracy theory. Here is a coverage of that on with Brian Williams. Was this last night? Okay. And he's got 2 reporters on. One is Costa from the Washington Post. And the other one, and then the other one is the Wall Street Journal reporter. Here is Brian Williams.
Caught my attention from the political Twitter site called the Horse Whisperer.
Oh, pause it. Okay, first he's going to start with a tweet from the political Twitter site of the Horse Whisperer.
Yeah. Prominent.
Yeah. But
prominent
this
website,
is-
twitter.com/horse whisperer.
This is the
High
horse
clout
whisperer
ranking.
tweet. Right.
My attention from the political Twitter site called the Horse Whisperer. Okay, since this is trending, here's my Bernie story. The year was 2016 and Bernie was already long eliminated from contention. An actual Democrat would have stopped torpedoing the nominee and worked to defeat Trump, but Bernie had books to sell. The end. That kind of nicely sums up how some Democrats feel about Bernie when they hear him using a...
All right, let's just stop there for a moment. So that summarizes how some Democrats perceive what Bernie did. And that is accurate. Some Democrats do perceive Bernie as having done that. Who are those Democrats? Well, since Brian Williams used the horse whisperer to represent them, let's look and see who the horse whisperer is. Turns out the horse whisperer is a marketing guy who has worked with Exxon, Aetna, Citibank. Click on the right there. This is a list of his LinkedIn. He is a senior strategy consultant, independent, consultant to leading agencies and clients. Clients include American Express, Gillette, DirecTV, L'Oreal, Exxon, Genentech, Merck, Eli Lilly. Those are pharmaceutical companies. Cisco, Verizon, AT&T, T-Mobile, Old Navy, Time Inc., etc.
So he's definitely a Hillary Clinton Democrat.
Well, I don't know if he's a Hillary Clinton Democrat or not. The point is, he is a corporate. He is from the corporate sector. Now, led the growth efforts for U.S. offices of International Integrated Agency Network. In this role was responsible for cultivating relationships, proposing marketing strategies and programs for major marketers, including Aetna, Citibank, Bristol Myers, numerous others. Now, I'm not suggesting that Aetna or Citibank or Exxon or any other of these major corporations told the horse whisperer to tweet like that. Okay? Because this dynamic and this relationship is really important. I don't believe that Aetna, AT&T, Exxon, Bristol Myers, Eli Lilly, whatever other drug companies he worked for, the ones he's not mentioning because he thinks those might be problematic.
The
military.
rumor is the military. That's a rumor I've heard. Yeah.
I'm not suggesting that any of those companies told him to tweet that. What I am suggesting is that the reason why they hire a guy like that is because he's a guy who would tweet like that. And this is an important dynamic to keep in mind here. Let's continue with that.
Trump talking point. What is the state of the Sanders campaign as you know it?
Well, the Sanders campaign is very frustrated right now with coverage, and they're not alone. Democrats, Republicans, politicians generally start to blame the media when they don't like coverage. What is new and what is sort of a Trump-like attack line is tying the Washington Post to Amazon with he has no evidence here. And we saw him tone this down a little bit, but we saw Marty Barron come back and say this is a conspiracy theory. But the Bernie Sanders campaign right now, he is polling in second or third. He's doing a lot better than 21, 22 people in that field. But he is not moving up. He's been sort of stagnant. And so he needs to expand his support. And he is frustrated about coverage that points out that he is not, he's number two, but Joe Biden is still certainly in the lead. And he is competing with people like Elizabeth Warren, who has a lot of very similar ideas, but her polling is going upwards. So while Sanders is stagnant, his campaign is frustrated by coverage that they view is not talking about all of the great things he's doing and all of the support he has, which he certainly does have support. He's got lots of donors, he's got grassroots support, but political campaigns want to talk about the good and not any of the bad.
So, Robert Costa, when General Electric owned this building and this network, it coincided with the birth of the interwebs, and a lot of conspiracy theorists had us all on a conference call every morning with Jack Welch. So we'd have the talking points from the electric power division, the nuclear division, electric trains, all of that. Of course, it was never true, and I ask you just to show our homework. When was the last time you met or heard from Jeff Bezos about your coverage?
Pause it. Now, I will tell you this, that in 2004, I knew an MSNBC contributor who was very, very explicit. We couldn't talk about it at the time, but Bob Wright, who was the NBC executive, CEO, and then the chairman and CEO until about 2007, Bob Wright spoke to Jack Welch. And Bob Wright spoke to all the people at GE, who were the number one weapons manufacturer in this country, who owned over 51% of NBC. And I know for a fact that in the run-up to the war, they certainly got calls about people saying certain things on the network and putting Frank Luntz out there to do stuff. So Brian Williams might be right that Jack Welch never called him. But why would Jack Welch call Brian Williams? Why wouldn't Jack Welch call Brian Williams' boss and say, hey? Now, my bet is that never had to happen, because in the same way that Aetna and Exxon and Eli Lilly don't have to tell the guy who works for them and does marketing, hey, you should be critical of the political candidate who wants to take away our power. You don't have to say that to him, because the reason why you hired him was because you don't have to say that to him. So when Bernie Sanders says that the Washington Post comes after him and cites the relationship they have with Amazon and one of the richest individuals in the country with a corporation that pays no taxes, the issue isn't that Jeff Bezos calls up the Washington Post and says, hey, I need you guys to toe my line. When Jeff Bezos buys the Washington Post, he does so because it's a paper that toes his line. That doesn't mean every reporter there. But when decisions are made, and we know how it went down at the Times, when decisions are made to put coverage on Bernie Sanders, and when decisions are made to ask questions of the stable of people who are there, the least sympathetic are appointed, which does not happen. Does not happen on across the board with candidates. Look, this is controversial in the context of book reviews. And people are able to say, hey, wait a second. Why are you having someone who doesn't know anything about this topic review that book? Or why are you having someone who has a problem because his wife left him to go with this guy's brother, review this book? That happens all the time. When people talk about that, there's no conspiracy theories. People say this is a bad editorial assessment. Jeff Bezos buys this paper, and if he doesn't feel like he has to interfere, it's because he's happy with what it's doing for him and his interests.
I would just like to add, I think another thing, and I'm not sure we have time to play this Chomsky clip, but it really speaks to it, that another thing that's very reflective, and I could speak in personal conversations with some journalists, but actually also people who do marketing jobs, like the horse whisperer gentleman, that they are so into this unacknowledged ideology that they actually have, they're being very sincere that they think that Bernie's being conspiratorial, because they're so deep in that thought process that they think that any even noting of it is conspiracy, if that makes sense. Like right. They're not even disingenuously putting it off. They cannot even understand the distinction between
how stupid do they think Jeff Bezos is?
Literally,
how stupid would Jeff Bezos have to be to financially support a major publication that would be critical of it, of his interest?
And they understand that in every other field of life, because it's intuitive and obvious. But when it comes to them, they're so regimented that they don't think so.
All right, we're going to get to let's do the Chomsky clip in a second. But I got to just I got to take a break. I mean, because Liquid IV has told me to say all of this. Staying properly hydrated, one of the most important factors during hot summer months. Liquid IV, the fastest, most efficient way to stay hydrated. We fight for it. We still have some in that box up there. I'm surprised. I got Mila will take some liquid IV. I've got her doing some exercise over the course of the summer. That's been nice. I have friends who do it. I always take a bunch of packs with me when I travel. And when occasionally I go a little overboard with the celebrations. We love our liquid IV around here. It's the fastest growing wellness brand, and it can provide the same hydration as drinking 2 to 3 bottles of water. Plus, it contains 5 essential vitamins. Vitamin C, more than an orange, and more potassium, or as much potassium as a banana. It's a healthy alternative to traditional sugary sports drinks. No artificial flavors, no preservatives, and it's perfect for fueling tough workouts, preventing muscle fatigue, promoting healthy post-workout recovery. You can find them everywhere. Their hydration multiplier is even sold at Costco's nationwide. I love Liquid IV. I know you will too. Right now, my listeners get 25% off at liquidiv.com when you use my code majority at checkout. That's 25% off anything you order at Liquid IV's website. Go to liquidiv.com, enter my promo code majority, get your savings, start getting better hydration. That's liquidiv.com, promo code majority. Don't wait. Start properly hydrating today. And also, in this golden age of television and podcasts, we all know the value of a truly compelling narrative. Cue Hunt a Killer. It's the murder mystery box that immerses you in an ongoing experience. With every delivery or episode, you dive deeper into what it's like being a detective. So they send you a box, and in it, it has it has documents, has evidence. You're going over it. It's like, what was that? True crime? What was that one on HBO? It's like one of those True Detective.
What was that? True crime?
And here's the thing I really like about it, and why I got Mila into it so much. No screens. You build an investigation board. You can do it on an online community if you want. We do not. We do it at home, which is great. And we help each other through each challenge. Part of the proceeds of every box go to the Cold Case Foundation to help fund cold case investigations. For me, the thing I like it is I liked Clue when I was a kid. And this is like Uber Clue. And it's ongoing, and it's the only time that Milo will talk to me for the most part. And right now, for our listeners, my daughter, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority, get 20% off your first box. They only accept 200 members per day, so hurry to take advantage of this offer. That's huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box, huntakiller.com/majority. All right, so let's continue on. I just want to play this Noam Chomsky clip, because when we talk about Bernie Sanders saying that the people who work for Jeff Bezos, unsurprisingly, have a tainted perspective to his politics. They necessarily, despite the fact that if you look at his platform, issue by issue, his policies are mainstream as far as the American public is concerned. They are, by any definition of the word, at least in terms of what they hold and support, his policies are mainstream. He is not covered in that way. And his policies are not covered in that way. And these are the type of people who are going to work in this type of institution, largely speaking. Not all, but many. That is going to be the editorial thrust. On some level, is going to be broadly status quo. This is a Washington Post has a culture and a pedigree that comes from things like saying that Bill Clinton is not of this place. That is the attitude and culture that comes from that paper. The New York Times, no better. In some instances, I think maybe even worse. But here's Noam Chomsky talking about this dynamic.
King.
You don't wait. Like the problem that people had in
with an offended Andrew Marr, I might say.
The problem I had with Hillary Clinton doing those speeches for whatever it was, $250,000, $400,000, whatever it was not that she was going to do something for those banks because they were giving her the money. It's that they knew that she was the type of person who does stuff for them. And that's why they give them the money.
Yeah, they're friends.
Yeah, that's basically it. We are here, right here, you and I, like this. And so I don't need to tell you to do anything. I just know you're going to do it.
Sponsoring organization. Tell me how that works. You're not suggesting that proprietors phone one another up, or that many journalists get their copies spiked, as we say?
It's actually Orwell, you may recall, has an essay called Literary Censorship in England, which was supposed to be the introduction to Animal Farm, except that it never appeared, in which he points out, look, I'm writing about a totalitarian society, but in free democratic England, it's not all that different. And then he says unpopular ideas can be silenced without any force. And then he gives a two-sentence response, which is not very profound, but captures it. He says two reasons. First, the press is owned by wealthy men who have every interest in not having certain things appear. But second, the whole educational system, from the beginning on through, just gets you to understand that there are certain things you just don't say. Well, spelling these things out, that's perfectly correct. I mean, it's the first sentence is what we expand on.
This is what I don't get, because it suggests that, I mean, I'm a journalist, people like me are self-censoring.
No, not self-censoring. There's a filtering system that starts in kindergarten, it goes all the way through, and it doesn't work 100%, but it's pretty effective. It selects for obedience and subordination, and especially, I think that
so stroppy people won't make it to positions of influence.
Behavior problems, or if you read applications to a graduate school, you see that people will tell you he's not, doesn't get along too well with his colleagues. You know how to interpret those things.
I'm just interested in this because I was brought up, like a lot of people, probably post-Watergate film and so on, to believe that journalism was a crusading craft and that there were a lot of disputatious, stroppy, difficult people in journalism. And I have to say, I think I know some of them.
Well, I know some of the best and best-known investigative reporters in the United States. I won't mention names, but whose attitude toward the media is much more cynical than mine. In fact, they regard the media as a sham, and they know and they consciously talk about how they try to play it like a violin. If they see a little opening, they'll try to squeeze something in that ordinarily wouldn't make it through. And it's perfectly true that I'm sure you're speaking for the majority of journalists who are trained, have it driven into their heads that this is a crusading profession, adversarial, we stand up against power, a very self-serving view. On the other hand, in my opinion, I hate to make a value judgment, but the better journalists, and in fact the ones who are often regarded as the best journalists, have quite a different picture.
Owned.
Well, first of all, what I love about that is like he is subtweeting the guy sitting right across from him.
Before subtweeting even existed, Noam Chomsky mastered it in interview formats.
I am talking about you, just in case you were actually wondering, but I'm not going to say that. And that is, I mean, this is the reality of this. Now, with that said, Bernie Sanders didn't come. I'm quite sure that Bernie Sanders understood this dynamic before then. And so
I saw Bernie Sanders speak in college. He made precisely the same critique. He spent most of his speech talking about media monopolies.
Here's the other part of why what we talked about earlier is BS. Because all of those journalists, right, they're making it like he's being conspiratorial and he's being Trump-like. What Bernie Sanders is doing is he's not discovering the truth of what is problematic with the media. This is political campaigning. And the other conversation that Brian Williams could have had, and we played that stuff earlier, but the other conversation that Brian Williams had, if he didn't choose Bob Costa from the Washington Post or the other reporter from the Wall Street Journal, Costas, I mean, he's a good reporter. Started out covering right-wing stuff. Let's say Brian Williams had a different MSNBC contributor on to talk about this. Let's say he had me on. My perspective wouldn't be, he's frustrated about the campaign. This is coming out of frustration in the way that, a child, when you get frustrated because you won't give them they can't watch a second episode of television or something like this. They're complaining. He's complaining. No, what I would say, look, this is a reality that Bernie Sanders knows to be the case. We used to talk about media concentration in this country and the power of wealthy people owning the press as being problematic. It still is, even in the era of Donald Trump, when we have more reliance on the press than we may have wanted to, admit in the past. And Bernie Sanders is using this as an example of how corporate interests are aligned and how they own this network that we're talking on, the other networks that we could be talking on, and all the papers. And that we need to rebalance stuff. And from a political perspective, this is a very smart move. This is a very smart move. Brian Williams and his guests are not above taking a cynical look and looking at the political value of these machinations. And that's what they do for virtually every other single candidate. But they don't do that for Bernie Sanders. They don't say, with his brand of politics, this actually makes a lot of sense. Right. Because it's perfectly consistent with everything he's saying. And he's saying that there is people at the 1%, let's call it, have aligned interests. They don't necessarily have to meet at Davos to plan out their year's agenda. They have aligned interests, and they work in those interests, and they have outsized power, and that's what you get. But even the way that they framed that segment was indicative of the problems. And even though Jeff Bezos doesn't work at, doesn't own MSNBC, Comcast does, GE does, and they're more comfortable, and Brian Williams certainly understands this, with stuff that is a little bit more to the right than where they've been in the past.
You don't need to give Jake Tapper questions or talking points, but if we did a really easy thought experiment, if the CNN ad lineup was filled primarily with Teamsters unions and UAW ads, it's very unlikely that he would say, John Delaney, you say that Bernie's healthcare plan is going to ruin American society. Would you like to elaborate that?
I
disagree with that.
Excuse me. Maybe the question to Delaney, but the entire frame of the question would be massaged and influenced by the context.
Jake Tapper is not sensitive to what ads are on there. No. Jake Tapper wouldn't be hired if this was...
I'm not giving you a linear... I'm not saying linearly he watches it.
Yeah,
I'm
in the
saying
same way that it is arranged now.
Broader atmosphere, the filtering that Chomsky
I don't even think it's that sensitive. Because certainly I know that unions used to advertise on MSNBC. I don't know if they still do. But unions used to advertise on MSNBC because they thought they could aggregate the biggest audience of the left there. BP used to advertise on MSNBC because they thought they could aggregate
themselves as green.
They could aggregate the biggest group of most outspoken critics of them there. The advertising thing is ebbs and flows. The bottom line is these are owned by major corporations. They will hire people who are corporate friendly. Period. End of story. There is no specific pressure that comes in these news organizations, but the general flow of things is what leads you down these certain paths. What you get rewarded with leads you down these paths, and they're not even specific. It's not if you do this, you'll get that. It's just broad principles that you see, and you see them more, and that's how you got through the door in the first place.
Yep. I co-sign everything that you said. Can I just add 2 things real quick?
Please.
I agree with Chad Vigorous or Pretty Bad Lefty's take on Twitter, which is that Bernie stands to pick up more votes from Joe Rogan fans and Cardi B fans than he does from people who stan MSNBC. So maybe this won't be so bad for him. And 2, can we just appreciate the terminally basic mean girl shade on display in that first clip? Like, you are only talking about me for attention because your campaign is crashing and burning. Sad. Like, if anyone is using a Trumpian line, I think it's that.
Right. I think that's true. And frankly, I think that on balance, I'm not quite sure that even the MSNBC discussion doesn't help Bernie. I mean,
Definitely helps
to the
Bernie.
extent that there were people out there who do have issues with corporate control who watch MSNBC, there's some. I think it also raises him out there. I don't think this in its totality actually hurts Bernie at all. I think Bernie wants to be in the news, and I don't think it necessarily hurts Bernie to be criticized by Brian Williams or by someone from the Wall Street Journal. In fact, let's recall what the sort of one of the biggest, piercing things that pierced through the noise in terms of Bernie's ad campaigns was, here are the people who don't endorse me. And having them all line up to not endorse him and to criticize him, I think, is probably not a bad thing. It's just people should be aware of what the dynamics are and how this works, because there's more to be gleaned from this than just how it impacts Bernie Sanders. I mean, we should be watching the news always with this perspective and this understanding. These are broad, they're very sort of like long, broad strokes in terms of what impacts the media in this way. And so let's talk about this, these new regulations by the Trump administration. They are... they're basically a way of limiting immigration, particularly legal immigration, for people who are already here as well. This public charge stuff. And, I mean, it fails under the weight of its own rules anyways. But here is Aaron Burnett in the ongoing saga of Ken Cuccinelli trying to make the Trump policy fit in to, at the very least, the perception we have about ourselves in this country. That perception, I would say, is probably a little bit more aspirational than actual. But nevertheless, let's use this frame when it is worthwhile. And to a certain extent, there's an obvious truth to the fact that it wasn't necessarily always with open arms, and it wasn't always necessarily pleasant. But this country was built and has been built through much of its history on taking in refugees and immigrants from around the world. And it has strengthened this society in many respects. Here's Aaron Burnett, again, returning to Ken Cuccinelli's. You'll recall yesterday we played this clip when he was asked about, we'll take in your poor, your wretched. And then he said, and he added, we will take in your poor and your wretched who can stand up on their own 2 feet and blah, blah, blah. Now, that concept is good for Ken Cuccinelli. We'll pick it up after this.
You say this is about self-sufficiency, and you say that proudly. You heard me play you this morning when you quoted the Emma Lazarus poem on the Statue of Liberty.
I wasn't quoting it. I was answering a question.
Right, okay, I'm sorry. But you were giving your version of what you thought the poem should say, right?
No, I was not.
You said, give me your tired and your poor who can stand on...
I'm not rewriting poetry.
Okay, what you said is, give me your tired and your poor who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge. I just played you saying it.
Right, I listened.
Okay.
What's
So I'm just
question?
making sure you're not disputing. Okay. So obviously the actual poem is quite different. I'm going to read it.
Right. I was answering a question. I wasn't writing poetry, Aaron. Don't change the facts.
I'm not changing the facts. I'm just saying.
You're twisting this like everybody else on the left has done all day today.
I think it's important. You're saying that it's very important to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. A lot of people may support you and respect your saying that. But the poem doesn't say that. Right? The poem that's on the Statue of Liberty.
I didn't bring up the poem.
Well,
an NPR reporter did, and now you have. I didn't bring it up. I'll answer your substantive, intelligent questions.
So I'm going to give you a substantive, okay. However it came up, you said, give me your tired and your poor. Okay? Who can stand on their own 2 feet and who will not become a public charge. That's what you said. I just played it. The poem reads, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of the teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Wretched, poor, refuse, right? That's what the poem says America's supposed to stand for. So what do you think America stands for?
Well, of course, that poem was referring back to people coming from Europe where they had class-based societies where people were considered wretched if they weren't in the right class. And it was introduced, it was written 1 year.
Now, what the F does this guy talking about?
Yeah, America was a total communist egalitarian utopia.
But wait a second.
I understand. I get it.
What's his logic?
His logic is that, yes, in the way he's talking about class is that in a European context, at that time, you might even be relatively loaded, but you're looked down upon because you don't have a title or something. And so you can come here and you don't have to put on airs, but you have a lot of money still, so you can stand on your own 2 feet.
So class is identity.
I think it's literally, I think it's basically what he's saying. You don't know the difference between
poor
like, idea. I'm not saying I'm telling you how I think he's spinning it, dude.
I think
he's just skipping over poor. I think this is like he should rewrite the Bible like the meek who own their own businesses shall inherit the earth.
The operative
meek small business.
The meek small business owner.
I mean, Aaron may have emphasized wretched, but the poor seems to be the operative issue here.
I think he's not talking. I think poor of title.
Poor of title.
There's a lot of old Regency dramas about that type of thing. He's got a shoe factory.
I'm sure
he wants to marry the Duchess. Everything's fine, but it's a problem because he ain't a duke.
Poor of Olive Gardens.
It was written 1 year after the first federal public charge rule was written that says, and I'll quote it, any person unable to take care of himself without becoming a public charge, unquote, would be inadmissible, or in the terms that my agency deals with, they can't do what's called adjusting status, getting a green card, becoming legal permanent residents. Same exact time, Aaron, same exact time. In the year it went on the Statue of Liberty, 1903, another federal law was passed expanding the elements of public charge by Congress. This is
I mean, when my family came here, they came here as crofters from Scotland, right? They had no education. They had nothing.
Right.
But I am here because they were allowed in, and I'm an anchor on CNN. Right? So I'm just saying I wouldn't be here.
My Italian grandfather sponsored his 2 cousins to come here. This is a tradition that many of our families, yours and mine, can point to.
Yeah. But Aaron, we're white. We're white from Europe. Well, we weren't at the time, but we are now.
Exclusionary.
No. But what I'm saying is I would have been excluded. I don't know about you, but I would have been.
Well, no, that's not. You're deciding on one point, and our ISOs are going to take what's called a totality of the circumstances test, which has long been the test for public charge.
Okay.
And this
he's lying about this, and I'll tell you this. Here's the thing. The public charge thing is a vague term, and the rules and regulations that define it. And according to this new rules and regulation, they must have a 51%. They must assess with each potential immigrant. They must assess that there's a 51% chance that they will end up being a public charge. Now, we know that at least 80% of all immigrants do not become a public charge. And there is no subset of that group that has any different numbers than that. You can't say only 50% of immigrants from Guatemala don't become public charges, or only 40% of people from Moldova, whatever, don't become public charges. There is no Department of Homeland Statistics that would indicate that you can make an assessment on any group of immigrants that they're going to be a public charge. 51% sure. So this is ripe for abuse, and it's intimidating immigrants, and it's total BS.
Well, he's not lying about the law from 1882, though. Like, it's crazy. It's funny because I had it pulled up before he even brought it up. I pulled it up at the beginning of this segment.
No, I have the law here in front of me as well.
He's giving evidence that the Statue of Liberty has been lying since the beginning.
No, he's not. Because the public charge rule had to do with a lot of different stuff at that time than what he's made it out to be. You could obviously get in if you were poor. The question is, do you have someone who is going to vouch for you?
It seems like
that's my point. Is
idea.
They've changed? It's not the same idea. It is the same idea, but in practice, it's radically different. That's the whole point why they've changed the rule, the public charge rule.
Well, I'll also add that the criminal provision of the act did not include immigrants who were convicted of political offenses, reflecting the traditional American belief that the United States is a haven for those persecuted by foreign tyrants. And that's definitely not being honored now.
Right. All right. Let's go to the phones. Yeah. You got a phone up? Call from a 509 area code. Who's this? 509.
Hey. Hello.
Hello. Is this Ronald Reagan?
Is this me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hey.
Ronald Reagan. Tell us about this public charge thing.
Cuomo?
Huh?
Oh, you want to talk about immigration? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I have. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. So for public charge, it might help just real quick to talk about the way it already exists. So if I have a client who's a foreign national, let's just say he's Mexican, and he's been here for 20 years working and supporting himself and without access to the public safety, the social safety net, and he gets married to a U.S. citizen, she wants to petition for him. She has to also file this affidavit to support this contract with the government. But if she's a stay-at-home mom, even though he's been completely self-sufficient for many years in this country, his income doesn't count towards the affidavit of support because it doesn't technically come from a legal source since he's working without permission. So anyhow, this person who's been totally self-sufficient has to go and find a co-sponsor, usually a family member or maybe a boss, and ask them to sign off on the same sort of contract that they'll support this person.
Yeah, and let's just be clear here. I just want to be clear here, and you gotta talk a little more clearly because there's something going on with your phone that sounds a little weird. But this affidavit is a contract where you're basically, it's almost like you're guaranteeing an apartment for somebody, right? It's like if they don't pay the rent, I will pay the rent.
Right. Right. But not for bills and things like that, but for any type of needs-tested benefits. And so that's an obstacle for a lot of people, even though, like I said, they've already been working. They're very self-sufficient. And the new rule is like 800 pages long, but there's some pretty nefarious stuff in there, like they can look at English language skills to determine whether or not the person could be self-sufficient. That's never been a requirement, obviously. They can do credit score, credit checks, and more things like that. But overall, it's just creating a sense of fear. It doesn't apply to a lot of types of immigrants, like asylees or refugees, but even those people have been taking their kids off of Medicaid or Obamacare, thinking that they're going to be rounded up and deported if they get food stamps, for example, for their U.S. citizen children. But one of the things that I think is not really being reported, which is pretty nefarious about all of this is that USCIS, which is a benefits agency, it's not ICE, it's not Border Patrol.
Ron Reagan, wait, hold on for a second. Can you, what are you talking into?
Yeah.
What are you talking into? Are you talking into a phone? Like, are you talking to a headset?
Yeah.
Headset? Oh, that's better. Whatever you just did right, that's much better.
Okay.
Yeah, much better.
Okay. I turned off my Prius.
Great.
I'm gonna die in the
I
sun.
can't
but
hear too
it's all worth
good.
it.
I don't know.
So, USCIS has made two other changes. One is that if you file for a green card, they can essentially deny the case. Typically, they'll issue a request for evidence if they're unsatisfied with the evidence that you filed or that you submitted. But they announced this change, I don't know, maybe a year ago or so, saying, if we're unsatisfied, rather than issue a request for evidence, we can just flat deny the case. And so you're then out the $1,200 filing fee if you filed for a green card. So that's one change. And the other change is that they're going to be more aggressive in issuing notices to appear to removal proceedings for cases that they deny. So if you take a situation where now, instead of just looking at an affidavit of support and does somebody support you who earns enough money, yes or no, well, now we're going to look at all of these other circumstances, like what kind of diseases you might have, or if you speak enough English, all of these other things. And we're going to use that as a pretext to deny your application. And we're going to be more aggressive in denying applications and in forwarding your case to the immigration court for deportation proceedings. It has a real chilling effect, and also could result in lots of good people being denied and tied up in hearings for years and years. So this guy's a real douchebag, Ken Cuccinelli, with all due respect, but it's not just the affidavit of support and the public charge thing, although I think that's horrible. But it's the sort of combination of 3 or 4 different policies which make it possible to really target people and turn what's supposed to be a benefits agency into an enforcement agency.
Right.
And there's also a lot of other types of cases where people have to go back to their country to consular process. And that's, they've emboldened the consular officers to deny more cases on the affidavit of support and on the public charge grounds. And the problem with that is that if you go to consular process in Mexico, let's say, and if they deny the affidavit of support, now instead of being in Mexico for a couple of weeks, the process can really drag on. You could be down there for 3 or 4 months. And for a lot of people, that's not an option. And so, more and more people are going to just stop applying for things that they perfectly qualify for.
And do you know about the 1882 law? The public
wait a
charge
second.
thing?
Wait. Let me just. We can get to the 1882 law in a second. So when you say that people are applying for benefits, what benefits are they eligible for now? I mean, based on their status.
Well, usually people aren't applying for benefits for themselves. It's for their U.S. citizen children,
right? Which
is perfectly fine. So food stamps or things like that. Under the current rules, Medicaid and Obamacare, those sorts of things are okay. Mostly it's TANF and certain things like that they're not supposed to be getting, or I think like certain types of emergency medical treatment could be included. The affidavit of support typically is used, it's not enforced all that much by the government, but it can be used in the family court context. And in a divorce. So when Michael brings over his wife from wherever, Moldova,
Right, there you go.
and
It's amazing you'd want to make that joke, Ronald Reagan.
yeah, his wife, yeah, and then he's like, he kicks her to the curb because it's Michael, right? She could use the affidavit of support in their divorce proceedings to say, look, this guy promised to provide for me, and that's typically how it's enforced. But
so wait a second,
it is also enforceable by the government.
Are there situations where someone is in here, they have no papers, that they're getting TANF support? No, right?
No.
Are there instances where people are in here without papers and they're getting food stamps?
No.
So what we're talking about is we're talking about people who have a legal status, but they're en route to trying to become citizens because their kids are citizens, or they're getting married to a citizen, or their parents are citizens, maybe theoretically, I guess, and they're simply
right.
And so they have some type of residency status here. They have some type of visa. They're legal.
Right. Well, so it's people who are either so they're not applying for citizenship; they're applying for permanent residency or a green card. So they're either going from undocumented or what they call a non-immigrant visa, so like a student visa or a temporary visa, to being allowed to stay here permanently with a green card. So it's in that process that they look at all kinds of grounds of inadmissibility or reasons to deny your green card. It could be terrorism grounds or negative immigration history. There's a big long list of things that can disqualify you, and public charge is one, and it has been one for a long time. Basically, since like 1997, they've said, just fill out this form, prove that you earn 150% of the poverty guidelines based on your household size, and that's sufficient to not be denied a green card because of on public charge grounds. And now what they're saying is, well, we don't want to just look at how much you're making or how much your sponsor is making. We want to be able to pull back the curtain and look at all of these other things. And, let's run a credit score of you or your wife or your co-sponsor, or let's, take a look at how much English you're speaking and these sorts of things. So,
they're widening, they're raising the bar, essentially, is what they're doing, and they're looking for any type of excuse to deny people. All right, so Jamie had a question about the original underlying law of the public charge that Cuccinelli was talking about.
Yeah, like reading through the language in this law, I don't see how what's happening now is not a legacy of immigration policy that we've had for a very long time.
Right, yeah, I think that's true. And in a way, like when Cuccinelli's like, hey, well, the Statue of Liberty, we meant Europeans, like he's telling a more accurate version of history than people who are like, this isn't who we are and we're better than this. It's like, no, we're not. And his version of the history and of our immigration history specifically is actually pretty accurate. And that's the problem, right? So, like, getting lost in some poem rather than talking about the realities of our policies over the last 100+ years seems like a real failure on the part of the media.
How was the charge law though used? I mean, 97 obviously it was amended. What was it prior to that?
I don't know too much about that. I was in like middle school, so.
Well, you knew about 97.
No, I mean, I'm not sure exactly. I think it's been pretty much the same for quite a while. But I'm not sure if it was more strictly enforced or less strictly enforced. I'm sure it's sort of ebbed and flowed,
right,
to some degree, but I don't know specifically.
All right. Well, thanks
But
for.
yeah, I mean, this guy's a real piece of work, and he's terrible. I did want to ask you real quick about Chris Cuomo.
Yeah.
Don't you think it was kind of lame that he stepped to this guy and threatened to push him down a flight of stairs? That's like stepping to somebody and threatening to push him in front of a bus, kind of, right? Like,
I think
you're either going to fight a guy or you're not, but don't, like, use a flight of stairs to win the fight for you. To me, that was the most offensive part of the whole thing.
I
thought
think
it was kind of beta.
Okay. All right.
Beta.
I think. Yeah, I mean, Ronald Reagan, I mean, that's
Beta.
spoken like a guy who really clearly never gotten in any type of like altercation with another guy. That's his way of saying, like, I'm going to beat you up and then I can do with you whatever I want, like, i.e., throw you down the stairs. That was like what that guy said to that guy, the former Staten Island congressman, when he's like, I'm going to throw you over the edge here in this rotunda.
Like a boy.
Yeah, it's.
I wish
I don't think he was being literal. I think.
I don't think he was being. I
think what Cuomo was actually saying was like, I'm going to threaten you until one of my posse comes here and gets in between us, so that we don't actually have to have a fight because I know I'm going to get sued.
I thought it was funny how he said, "I'll throw you down the stairs," and I'm smart. Not like everybody says.
We're going to play that clip in a bit, but first we have to go to the fun half, folks. You can become a member of this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only support the free show, you get extra content every day. Jointhemajorityreport.com. Check it out. Don't forget, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority. Get 10% off. And check out the AM Quickie. It's going to be here, particularly during the week that we're on vacation. Or still, I should say. It's in the audio feed of the Majority Report. You got to sign up for the audio feed. You can do that through your podcast app or the free version, and it'll be living in there. And happy birthday, belated, to Michael Brooks, who made it back just in time for his party. And TMBS.
Indeed.
I mean, supposedly made it back just in time.
Supposedly.
We all know that you landed on Sunday, but that's all right.
I was supposed to land on Monday, so get your facts straight. And no.
You were supposed to land on Monday.
I was going to
always
always
you ended
miss
up
Monday.
Landing on
Tuesday. I'm still going to miss Monday regardless.
Right.
Just
no,
to
of
be
course.
clear about that.
No.
Tuesday was what was in question. Monday
Right.
was never happening.
Right.
Yes. But
So you
what a
definitely
shame that I
landed.
missed your charming self.
I'm
during my
sure
birthday.
that you were not in town on Tuesday.
I was not in town on Tuesday.
There's a lot of nods there.
Take from
but
that what you will. But
nevertheless,
before we
you
go
made
to
it.
my story, post roll, I believe.
Well, yeah, I'm going to do the post.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought you did those first. All right. Last night, we talked with Elaine Yu. She's an AFP reporter based in Hong Kong about the uprising there, but also some of the sort of broader Chinese political questions and even sort of correlations with what's happening in Kashmir. Brianna Joy Gray, TMBS crew for life. She's also Bernie Sanders' press secretary. We had a very big conversation about media bias, what the Sanders campaign is doing, and that sort of thing. And in the postgame, we all went over our Jeffrey Epstein theories and talked about Argentina, South Asia, a whole bunch more. I just want to say briefly, for one group of patrons, we release now video illicit histories, which are very, very well produced mini documentaries. And usually, and after a month where they're just for the patrons at a $21 and above level, we release them on YouTube. And so I would like everybody to check out the one we just put on YouTube of Patrice Lumumba and the Congo versus imperialism, featuring Milton Alamati. I'm incredibly proud of these. And the next one we'll be doing on a history of Brazil going back to the 60s. Patreon.com/TMBS.
Jamie, you were in country yesterday.
I was indeed. So this week on the Antifada, we had actress, comedian, and DSA organizer Simone Norman on. You may know her from the hilarious video that was going around when hot mean girls decided to become public leftists. Everything is praxis. She joined us for a little chat. We talked about the DSA convention in Atlanta. We talked about some of the resolutions that got passed, like the one on open borders. I took another stab at talking about borders for anyone who was curious/confused by the stuff I was saying the other day on, the long-term prospects of the social democratic welfare state, borders, ecofascism, yada, yada. We talked about sex work decriminalization, the Bernie or Bust resolution, also the Close the Camps nonviolent direct action that I was a part of, white supremacist violence and its connections to capitalism, and the uses and abuses of irony. And we also have a bonus with Simone coming out on Friday in which we talk about the video.
Brendan, you do not have a podcast, but Matt,
just only adding for Sam's profound love for you, Brendan.
But
you don't have some damn project that you have to promote.
Right.
I love you, Brendan. Thank you for my sound clips.
But Matt does.
Literary Hangover. Check it out.
Thank you.
Man. George Orwell, history infused with ganja.
That's just for patrons.
Check it out.
Folks, Hunt to Killer is the murder mystery box that immerses you in an ongoing experience. With every delivery or episode, you'll dive deeper into what it's like to be a detective, sifting through piles of documents, evidence, case files until you crack the case. Probably bad coffee. You're going to have to make that yourself. Right now, just for our listeners, you can go to huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. They only accept 200 members per day, so hurry to take advantage of this offer. That's huntakiller.com/majority for 20% off your first box. huntakiller.com/majority. Quick break, fun half, 646-257-3920. Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457-238-56-27. 1 half. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're not paying.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey Sam, hey Andy, you guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up.
Ooh.
Wow.
But Sam, I
Got to get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Did you confirm the name of that reporter, right?
Well, that's what I have in my inbox.
That must have been what it was.
Yeah, I would assume, yeah.
I can't hear his microphone. His microphone?
No,
Okay. Let's go. Oh, I'm going to fire up the IM machine. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen. Super fun half of the program. Here is Donald Trump defending Ken Cuccinelli for rewriting the poem. Now, again, I agree. The poem is aspirational. Our country has never been, as welcoming to immigrants as we sort of pretend that we have been. But there is no doubt that immigrant populations in this country have, to some extent, we're all immigrants here. But the ones that we consider to be immigrant, waves of immigration, have undeniably made this country to the extent that it's a great one. And here is Donald Trump, though. Ken Cuccinelli just can't. They're so insular that they just don't know how this sounds to people outside of it. And again, the question is, they've redefined and provided their henchmen. And incidentally, this is being done at a time where the Trump administration is attacking the unions representing immigration judges, because the union makes sure that the immigration judges have some independence from the DOJ. Remember, Jeff Sessions wanted all the immigrant judges to basically say, like, you have to decide basically, here's a color chart. And if they cross this shade of brown, they're not eligible. It's an exaggeration.
It's an exaggeration, but it's on that continuum, maybe.
Exactly. And it's like, we found proxies, actually, that we scientifically tested can find actually the hue of the person that is standing in front of you without having to actually
You
look
should
at
stand in front of this light, sir.
I
Exactly.
just feel like they hired a weird British guy for that.
But nevertheless, here is Donald Trump defending Ken Cuccinelli.
Maybe there ought to be a different poem on the Statue of Liberty that says immigrants come to stand up for themselves and take care of themselves. Do you think that should be changed?
Well, I don't think it's fair to have the American taxpayer, it's about America first. I don't think it's fair to have the American taxpayer paying for people to come into the United States. So what we've done is institute what took place many, many years ago at our founding, virtually. But we are just reinstituting it, and I think it's long overdue. I am tired of seeing our taxpayer paying for people to come into the country and immediately go on to welfare and various other things.
First of all, that doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Obviously it happens to some extent, but it certainly happens to a lesser extent than native-born Americans. The amount that immigrants put into the economy and pay in terms of taxes is still a net positive. And they don't have the ability, which is really the bottom line, to make these assessments in any accurate way. Unless it's like patently obvious. Someone comes in, they don't have the ability to work, or they don't have the ability to care for themselves, or they don't have someone who's going to sponsor and guarantee that that they won't need that type of support. So there you have it.
It would be fine if they did, though. Like,
what?
People are entitled to a basic level of a humane life, no matter where they're from or who they are.
I think that's true. And I don't know that, the American public would necessarily agree with that, broadly speaking. And I think from a moral standpoint, we should take in anybody that comes. But I think, broadly speaking, for the American public, I mean, this is obviously, they're doing this for not just for ideological reasons, but because they perceive that this is what their voters want. And they are trying to create a wedge where they are getting Democrats to get on stage and say we should let anybody in, even if they're going to immediately, tax dollars are going to go pay for them. I mean, this is the same dynamic that they have been demonizing all sorts of welfare programs since, the mid-'60s, which is to make it as if all these money you're paying in taxes just go to black people or to Mexicans.
That's
I remember
how they
a
attacked
study-
the welfare state
I-
for everyone.
I remember a study
That's
from the
what I was gonna
80s where it was like, I think it was late 80s, but it was basically, Chomsky used to cite it all the time, but it was basically that from news coverage, Americans believed that the majority, like they didn't even overshoot. They thought that most of their tax dollars in the federal budget went to welfare and foreign aid.
Right. Right.
It's like incredible propaganda job.
And I bet you they also believe that the majority of the money that goes to welfare goes to black people.
Well, I mean, of course. I mean, there's a reason why those two things were even correlated in the polling. Like why, welfare programs and foreign aid are not necessarily at all the same thing, right? Like I get in some ways how they're on a continuum, but of course, racializing it would even connect those two things so firmly to begin with.
Oh, yeah,
right?
and
Like
that's-
here's all the money we're giving to other people across the board.
And that's why anti-racism has to play such an important role in getting back some semblance of the welfare state, right? And mass politics. But I feel like where we got hung up on yesterday was that you were arguing more in the short term and I was arguing more in the long term about this stuff. Because it is true, down the line, I see climate change is going to cause massive waves of migration around the world. Like we know that that's true. I don't have the numbers in front of me. And until we take a hard look at borders and the idea of border enforcement and keeping people out of our particular state, where the stage is set for kind of eco-fascism, and I really don't want to see us go there.
I'm not sure I follow, but
listen to the Antifada.
I will.
For more.
Here is Ainsley Earhart trying to, she has a friend, incidentally, who has an all chicken salad restaurant.
That's an enterprise.
And that is going to be, she worries about the future of that chicken salad enterprise, particularly if immigrants are all getting, all sorts of taxpayer largesse.
Refugees, asylum seekers, not part of this, but it is folks who come here. Listen, it's common sense. If you're a taxpayer, you want to know your dollars are going to people who, if they're here, are doing so productively. If you show a pattern of dependency, why would we want you to become a permanent resident or a citizen, as opposed to the folks who say, I've worked hard 2 or 3 jobs to provide for my family. I want to do it the right way legally to get a green card. And that's what the Trump administration has said. Those are the folks we welcome.
It is common sense. Think about it.
Such
Usually
common
people
sense.
come over here and they get a green card so that they can work in a restaurant or wherever they want to work. A better opportunity. But to come over to our country when you're not fleeing your country because you're not in danger, you're just coming to live on our soil, shouldn't you contribute too?
The problem is the left has created incentives for that. When you can get a driver's license, you can get free college, you can get free health care, and then ultimately...
Pause it. Well, first of all, we don't have free health care yet. We don't have the free college yet. And getting a driver's license, I wouldn't say is like a huge benefit. It's just a way in which you can work.
Also a way to vote illegally.
Right, exactly. To take you to the polls. But the fact of the matter is the point is that to the extent that people subscribe to this notion that you don't want to allow a citizen, regardless of who their family is or whether their family is here, whether they are in any way inhibited from working because of ailment or whatnot. I mean, even if you subscribe to their ideological perspective on that, that's where we're at now. This rule is about denying people that assessment based upon stuff that has no reasonable way of predicting that they would not be, if not self-sufficient, largely self-sufficient.
Free health care, and then
want them to be
ultimately
able to vote.
food stamps and possibly voting. I mean, all of that leads to that culture, and that's what the president's trying to fight back.
What culture?
The culture of dependency. Sam.
Browning.
The culture of Brown. Or as Nas said, an African-looking Manhattan, although he meant it in a positive way. But I think it's also just so, like, the way you cannot talk about the foreign policy dimensions of this stuff across the board, right? And there's no contradictions for ruthlessly protesting and fighting against and dismantling what they're doing. And at the same time, whether we're talking about ecological policies or direct U.S. interference in places, or European or Chinese for that matter, it's just going to be impossible to solve. I mean, you can directly correlate just even specifically Honduras with this massive spike going back to the Obama administration backing a coup against Manuel Zelaya in 2009. And now they have a narco state with massive street protests happening. I mean, the foreign policy dimension is so obvious and inescapable. And you have to ask those people when they talk about our borders and blah, 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 how they think they take that stuff seriously when they continue to push these foreign policy paradigms that generate instability and crisis.
As long as you fly over the border,
well,
the
there
border
you go.
doesn't have the same
yeah,
integrity.
It's different. It's a different flow.
Calling from a 248 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 248.
This guy sounds
248.
smart. Sounds like an insightful caller.
Going once. 248.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, you got me?
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, this is Karen calling from Michigan.
Hello,
How
Karen.
are you today?
Good. How you doing? What's on your mind?
Yeah, here, I'm going to mute the TV. Maybe that'll help.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm calling because, I've been listening to this. Well, yesterday you were talking about, immigrants, and they come here for these great jobs. I worked in a meat department for 5 years in Michigan in a, legitimate grocery store. It was 29 degrees in there all the time. And you're standing on a cold concrete floor. So it was freezing. In the middle of summer, I had to wear, jackets and sweatshirts and everything else.
Right.
If the floor got wet, it was dangerous. And this was after everything had been slaughtered and cut up and put into just big packages. So if you had to cut a chicken into pieces, it was just one of those chickens like you find in the counter, and we just take it on the bandsaw and zip it in half, It was not a big deal. Well, it's hazardous anyway because there's all these germs and everything.
Right.
And you get to take that home with you, right? And then, like I said, the floor gets slippery. I felt once and got a terrible concussion because the floor got wet in a spot. So if it's like that for me, and in Michigan, and we have the state come in and inspect on and off. They don't tell you when they're coming. They just make sure everything is kosher. Imagine how it's going to be for migrant workers in these hot factories.
Right.
And slaughterhouse. Oh, yeah. My dad said, because he lived on a farm, and then he went to a slaughterhouse, and he said, they're just horrible.
Yep.
He was disgusted, and he'd seen a lot of things.
I bet.
So you can't tell me, these people, they're taking our jobs. Gee, you want it? Go take it. They'll be glad to share. The thing is, though, I started listening to Chomsky yesterday, and I figured out the reason that we're so short on jobs is because the jobs are going to slaves in the prisons. I mean, why couldn't a person who's not in prison make a license plate and get paid a decent wage?
And slaves overseas.
That was revolutionary for me.
There's a lot of prison labor.
Think of all.
Appreciate.
Yeah, we're not paying them any money or 10 cents on the hour or something ridiculous. And when they get out of prison, they owe money.
Right.
And they have to pay the state back. So this whole thing about you want to know why you don't have a job? It's because they keep locking able-bodied people up in jail and not paying them any money to take your job.
Well, I think there's a
That's
lot
not
of
very nice.
there's a lot of different reasons. I think that's one of them. I appreciate the call, Karen.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just one more reason why prison abolition needs to be incorporated into a workers' movement.
Calling from a 415 area code. Who's this? Where are we calling from?
Hi, Sam.
Yes.
Hi. Oh, hi. My name is Joe Finberg. Wow, it's cool to be on the show.
Joe? What's
so
on your
I
mind?
actually am calling because, yeah, Joe.
Where are you calling
Can you
from?
hear me okay?
Yeah, where are you calling from?
San Francisco, California.
Okay, sounds like you're calling from the highway. What's up? What's up?
I'm walking down the street right now.
Okay.
So I guess I wanted to ask your opinion on two things. I've heard you say a lot of things about Israel in your show, and I'm also Jewish like you. I wanted to know what you think would be a fair and just solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay.
And secondly, when debating people on the center-right or alt-right, how do you convince them that they're wrong when they argue in bad faith and say that fascism is left-wing, or they try and conflate communism with fascism?
Well,
or people who call Antifa fascist.
Well, I don't know that you convince those people. I mean, I have arguments with those people for the sake of other people who are not arguing in bad faith. And so that's that one. In terms of like a just solution in Israel, one that I think is actually, we'll put aside for a moment what I think is actually doable, because I don't know what is doable at this point, to be honest with you.
I mean, I've always thought sorry.
Well, I mean, I would like to have seen, full return of the West Bank to the Palestinians. I would like to see Jerusalem an international city, internationalized in some way. I'd like to give
pre-1967 borders.
67, and
okay.
I would also like to see some type of, if not right of return reparations, mixed in with like a right of return for people who lost their homes and were dispossessed.
Yeah, but that's a pipe dream at this point, isn't it?
Well, look, I'm not convinced that all of it is in a pipe dream, to be honest with you. So, I mean, that's my point. Is like I don't know what is practical or possible at this point. I mean, I don't. I mean, I
think if we got rid of Bibi, if Bibi was no longer prime minister, there'd be a way to possibly have a vote in the parliament about Knesset, about having some kind of special citizenship status given to Palestinians living in the West Bank and Gaza. Like, I think a possible solution would be to convince Jordan to give them citizenship, and then grant all Jordanian citizens permanent residency in Israel, and maybe like exemption from income tax and exemption from property tax to incentivize it. So, Gaza could become the Las Vegas of Israel.
That seems a little bit Rube Goldberg to me, and I don't know how it's sustainable going forward. I mean, you're going to have a special class of citizenry that, presumably like their children would have that same sort of status, this sort of like weird quasi status.
Exemption from income tax.
They have no tax responsibilities. I mean, and then to think that that's sustainable down the road where other citizens are going to be, wait a second, why don't these people have to pay taxes in our society? I just don't think that creates.
They'd be permanent residents. They'd be citizens of Jordan, and they'd be permanent residents in Israel.
This is so. I'm sorry. This is just nuts. I mean, this is like some type of hybrid, like Dubai, like almost like foreign service workers situation. I mean, look.
I actually got the idea when I was in Australia, and I saw that New Zealanders have a similar arrangement in Australia.
Right, but here's the big difference between New Zealand and Australia and Israel and Palestine. Australia doesn't occupy New Zealand and not allow anybody democratic or political rights. And also, I just have to say, and regardless of what one thinks of Hamas or whatever, I think you have to at least somewhat consider some of the local sensibilities in a place like Gaza. And I think going from like a sort of slightly Islamic-oriented government to being the Las Vegas of Israel is, I think you got to go back to the drawing board on a lot of things.
I would also suggest that New Zealanders who go to Australia may have that deal, but they also have a sovereign country that they can return to.
Precisely.
That is not, it's not like we said, like, okay, well, how about this? Instead of New Zealand, all the New Zealanders, you'll become citizens of Indonesia, and but you'll have a special benefit in Australia, and then you can go back and live. I mean, I think it's imaginative, but I don't.
It's also just, I just have to say too, like, it ain't just Bibi. People need to let go of that. There's zero incentive for the whole far right structure of Israel, and some of Ehud Barak's talking points, which, to be fair, some other members of this new centrist bloc have slightly pushed back against, but Barak's first instinct, and he's the lead of it,
I disagree that there's a center in Israel. Israel doesn't have any leftism left in it anymore.
Or a center, really.
Twice in the past year.
Or even really a center. I mean, you could. I think Ehud Barak is Ehud Olmert's undoubtedly guilty of some war crimes, but I think he was a centrist leader who was willing to make concessions, and that does not exist anymore.
Appreciate the call.
Which is sad.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Good talking.
Yes, it is sad. That I like. Situation sad.
Exactly. HGW on the IMs. Trump is like a Captain Planet villain come to life. Ainsley Earhart is like a Nazi Stepford wife. Contagious chameleon. I think coming on the heels of that Joe Rogan interview, that this media attack on Bernie will help him. I mean, the first thing that Rogan fans see after this interview is the mainstream attacking him. It reinforces their view that he's an enemy of the elite. Yeah, I mean, I would love to get my hands on like sort of the demographics of Rogan's audience, to be honest with you. But
I think it's actually, I mean, it's obviously very disproportionately male. He is, but I think it, at least anecdotally, there's a hell of a lot more
do you think
people.
Disproportionately male or almost exclusively male? Because
no, I was about to say
our channel.
Well, right. Okay. All of YouTube is insanely overrepresented. Most of YouTube.
All of, I think, political YouTube.
But on the anecdotal side, there's a lot of people that, I mean, when you have that type of audience, like, I know plenty of people who it's like, they're like, yeah, he seems like a nice guy. I watched him interview Michael Pollan because I'm interested in that. When you hit that range, he's intersecting with a much broader audience, I think, than people might realize. And I also think, in a weird way, his position is more representative of what you could call some type of, like, quote unquote center in some ways than CNN. But yeah, I think it's all good news for Bernie. I think it's the same. I think it's just like the anti-endorsement list. I agree.
I love Sarah Palin. Sam, good on you for having Tim on as a guest yesterday. He helped me move on single payer from the public option when he was on that unnamed. You read that yesterday. We got that yesterday. I read that yesterday. Tim Faust. Wow, Sam, you're doing the whole Jews run the media thing. You're really showing your libertarian bona fides. I thought you were better than that. Why are you playing this clip of Noam Chomsky? If he was so smart, how come I've never seen him on cable news? Bob Carmody. Why don't any reporters ask Trump where is all the billions we're getting from China actually going? I don't know. Maybe he doesn't answer it. Central Mass Comrade. You see yesterday that idiot Dave Portnoy of Barstool Sports breaking labor laws on Twitter yesterday? He gave us Pat fans a bad name. You know, I saw that tweet and I was like, wait, does this guy work at Barstool? Like, I didn't know who he was. I was like, that was stunning.
Wait, the one where he said unions are for pussies?
No. The one where he said, like, somebody, I think it was him, somebody tweeted something like, hey, if you know anybody who wanted some, like, like anybody who wants to talk to a union rep or talk about unions, tweet at me. And he, like
blatantly violated the law.
He quote tweeted it like, anybody does this is going to be fired. Now,
No, he did tweet out, in today's world, being in a union is for pussies.
Oh,
but
yeah.
that I didn't see the other one.
Oh, yeah. And someone had the correct take on that, which is, it's mask off time for the connection between toxic masculinity and bourgeois
I love
ideology.
that, though. I want to see
It's
that.
just don't be a pussy. Let
Sam
me exploit you.
Sam gets leaked out.
Guys, everybody going to a union's like being a pussy.
Yes.
Do you see?
That is
it's being
that
a
is the
total
weirdest
pussbag.
construction that I've heard, though. Like that would be the last criticism I would ever
I would love to
imagine.
drive a
But this
crew
is
of
it.
Teamsters up to this
If you
guy's
work for Barstool
apartment.
Sports and DS Man, I will fire you on the spot. So this guy Rafi Letzer, I don't know who he is.
He's like a WGA rep, I think.
If you work for Barstool and you want to have a private chat about the unionization process, how little power your boss has to stop you, and how you can leverage that power to make your life better, my DMs are open. And Dave Bordoy said, if you work for Barstool Sports, DM this man, I'll fire you on the sport. And that is the most explicit violation of the National Labor Relations Act that I think one could see.
He should have added with, if you were one of my lawyers and you didn't vet my tweets, I will fire you on the spot.
If I was to sum up, like if someone said, could you sum up the National Labor Relations Act in one sentence? Like what's the heart of it? It is, you cannot threaten to fire your employee if they in
There's
any way
the multi-billion-dollar industry, like refining how to threaten your employees without actually doing it, how to discourage them, how to propagandize, how to imply, and this guy's just like,
how
I
to
know
punish them without it make it look like you're punishing them, but like literally.
I know what I'll do. I'm going to go on Twitter and tell them, if you do this, you'll be fired.
It's sort of like that theory in that movie Silver Streak with Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, where the idea was like, the louder you are, or maybe that was young Frankenstein, the louder you are, the less they pay attention to you. So maybe he thought, if I'm so explicit, nobody's going to notice.
It's nice to know, though, Barstool Sports is not merely appropriating dumb bro culture to make money.
Right.
It really is by dumb bros for
and they're
dumb bros.
really, really bad
That's
on
horrible.
on copyrights. They will ding you for like general feed videos. They suck.
Attorney
That's my
Andrew,
point.
just want to remind everybody that Jamie Kilstein still exists, has a podcast, and just had David Frum on said podcast. And yet his podcast is still better than another podcast because he didn't take my money on a lie and then have David Frum on. Tuck Face Carlson. Sam, it probably wasn't mere coincidence if Bernie was on Rogan's show shortly after Cornel West. What about Elon Musk twatting out his support for Yang just a couple of days after the Rogan-Sanders episode went live? There you go. AMG from NC. Hey, you guys, I know it's kind of hard, annoying to self-censor and not cuss when talking. Thank you guys for trying. It has helped me openly listen to you guys in front of my parents when I pick them up. They always get cussed out at work, and so they'd rather not hear it outside of work.
Wait, they get cussed out at work? Oh my god! Well, that's horrible.
Listen,
I was just about to make a joke about that, but I will not. I'm sorry.
I
That's terrible.
contend that the value of not cussing in this context and what we do is such a net positive over the value of cussing.
You do a lot of cussing when you're discouraging unionization off air.
Off air?
Yes.
You better be unionized.
You blankety blanks.
You blankety blankety.
If
and
you
blank, blank,
blank, anybody on any.
I actually really do. I think, I mean, now it's just a totally different show, but I think the phase when Stern first went to satellite and it was basically pretty much a similar show, it was definitely funnier when they had to not, like, when they crossed every line imaginable except for just like word lines.
Right.
There was something actually really funny about
Right, that tension
because
is
the
much better.
juxtaposition of like anything goes and then there's these very kind of silly arbitrary rules was pretty funny.
Absolutely. All right. Oh, okay. So let's do this for a moment. I don't know when we did this. Some video of Matt Walsh. This is the guy from the Daily Wire.
Oh, is he the minimum wage guy?
The minimum wage guy. And this is, I mean, I refer to him as like the not funny Matt Walsh because I know Matt Walsh, who is actually successful and funny, and he's an actor and a comedian. He was a used to be guy, and this is the not funny Matt Walsh, and we did a video about I guess a video he did on the minimum wage, and a listener sent this to us. I guess I don't know why it took so long. I don't know when he did this on his show, maybe a couple of weeks ago or something. And so he apparently was very upset because he felt like I was just mocking him the whole time. Like we did like something like a 20-minute video on him, and he said that Sam says
apathetically steamrolled him?
Yeah, Sam says I'm irrelevant, but he spent 20 minutes on me making fun of us. And I just want to be, this is more of like a general show note. We do 3 hours a day, and when I see someone out there who is saying something stupid about the minimum wage, that doesn't mean that I think you're relevant. It just means that I think your point was stupid and you're just copying some right-wing talking point, and you're a good vehicle for me to discuss it. We're not on the Matt Walsh's turning people beat here. I want to make that clear.
Definitely did not remember this guy's anything until today's sound sheet.
I know that he talks a lot about abortion. That's the only thing that I associate him with.
I just remember. I remember the minimum wage stuff.
But
it's like people should have babies who don't
and let me
get
just
paid
preface
for their
this
jobs.
with this, because this is going to get a little bit weedy, because he was very, very upset that all we did was make fun of him, saying that his work was worthless, that it looked like he didn't prepare.
Did we do the hacky, well, we do support the minimum wage, but if anybody's not going to get paid for their work, maybe it should be this guy.
Well, no, he was trying to
Okay.
make the argument that you are always paid what you're worth. That's what happens, and the minimum wage is wrong. And I was suggesting that what you deserve, you're always paid what you deserve and what you're worth to the employer. And I was suggesting, like, no, I think the work you're doing is an example that you don't get paid what you're worth, assuming you get paid anything. And
Maybe he doesn't. Maybe it's an elaborate internship.
it's possible. And then he was upset. He was upset that I compared him to my 14-year-old daughter, and he said that was rude of me to do to my daughter. And that's probably true, because there's times where I think she's more astute than this guy. But my point was, daughter, son, any junior high student, and I have to maybe amend this, early junior high, like more like 6th or 7th grade as opposed to like 8th grade, when things get a little more sophisticated. So and then he complained because we didn't really address his argument. And so let's play some clips from this, but this is going to get a little bit weedy. This is such a basic concept that I didn't think I'd have to do it, but Matt believes that workers get paid exclusively based upon their value to an employer. In other words, how much do they make for the employer? So let's just keep that in mind. Let's listen to what he's saying here.
Probably someone who's going to be fired. That's someone who's not going to have a job anymore. So Sam's exactly right about that.
Oh,
so
positive. So apparently, I think that was like where Matt also thinks that you can make theoretically zero as an employee, but if you're not making any money, then you're not really an employee. Now, that's a sticking point, but it's relevant, because having a job is not just about like, well, it is, you're setting aside your labor as a commodity, and you're also having to deliver that and provide for it to the employer. But go ahead.
I think he's getting it. Maybe he's catching on. The people who are on the minimum wage, the real minimum wage in this scenario, are probably going to be the people who mostly don't have jobs. They have zero worth to any employer. Thus, they have no job. Thus, their wage, in effect, is zero. And that's the starting point. Okay? The least amount you can be worth to an employer is nothing.
Pause
right?
it. No, wrong. Because if you're worth nothing to an employer, you're not an employee. They're not an employer. This is a relationship between two people. I don't walk around in my life as an employer.
You do. It's very confusing. I've seen you at.
People don't say to me, like, and I go into the supermarket, well, there's one of our employers.
I've had some coffees with Sam, and it's so bizarre where he just will look up and say,
You offered nothing to the
This
organization.
is important because he
No one
doesn't
gets it.
understand what work is. And he doesn't understand how employers, when they are employing people, make assessments about their worth. And continue.
Least amount you can be worth to an employer is nothing, right? What's hard to understand about this? Have you ever heard of the concept of zero, Sam? It's possible to be worth nothing to an employer. For instance, right now, as an employee, I am worth nothing to Subway because I don't work for them. So I get paid zero from them. I'm worth nothing to them. My wage from them is zero.
What?
All right. What I'm saying is that a minimum wage of $15. Now, I know it's.
But, and I know I'm not supposed to make fun of him on this, but he's doing this from notes. He's doing this all from notes.
the old "we all work for everybody and nobody" argument.
What I'm saying is that a minimum wage of $15. Now, I know it's an obvious point, but so you might say, why am I bringing it up? Well, because people like Sam struggle with it. So I feel like I have to, he's someone on a remedial level here, which is fine. I'm not making fun of him, but so I've got to just slow down and spell this out for him. What I'm saying is that a minimum wage of $15 an hour doesn't make sense because it commands really that every person who has a job must necessarily be worth at least $15 an hour to their employer just by the fact that they exist and they walk in the door. I don't think that's the case. So Sam, of course, goes for another personal dig there, as you saw, says that I'm worth zero to my employer. But again, not an argument. That's just an insult, a lame one. And here's the thing, Sam, it's also not accurate.
It was actually kind of funny.
Because I'm not worth zero to my employer. I'm not even worth zero to you because you're using me for content.
That's true. All right. Well, look, I don't know. The basic problem that Matt has is that he assumes that wages are set based upon the value that the worker produces for the employer. And if that was the case, if that was the only thing, now obviously, I'm not going to hire workers unless I think they're going to provide value to my business. That's obvious. But if it was the case that there was some type of very specific algorithm that a worker has to produce X and they are worth Y to me, then you wouldn't see things like this chart. This chart is the gap between productivity and a typical worker's compensation. That gap has increased significantly since 1973. Now, let me just, before we go into this, just make it clear. You'll see that as you go up to 1973 this starts in 1947. That dynamic is used as the baseline. There is necessarily a delta between the difference between what a worker's productivity is and what their compensation is. This is ultimately, out of that chunk of money comes paying for capital improvements, paying for technology, paying the rent, paying for the goods that come in, and then profit. Now, your rent may be fixed. Your systems costs may be fixed to some degree. Maybe you can improve the efficiencies. The investment you have to make in your equipment may be more or less fixed. Your labor costs, maybe you can fudge those, and your profit. Okay? Now, so understand, even though it looks like these two lines are equal, there's still that's just because it's indexed to 1947.
Well, maybe the workers just got lazy starting around 1973.
Well, if that was the case, in 1973, you would not see productivity continue to rise in the same fashion. However, hourly compensation goes flatline there while productivity goes up. So that delta grew significantly during that period of time. Now, which is not to say that there wasn't a delta before then, but again, it was static because it's indexed at 1947. But just the existence of the ability of hourly compensation versus the productivity to change disproves all of Matt Walsh's theory that you are paid what you are worth to an employer, because the value of those employees did not go down from 1973 until 17, when that chart was finished. It continued to go up. In fact, I think it went up slightly steeper than it had gone before, which means that productivity got even more efficient and there was even more productivity. But compensation barely budged.
Sam, I do have a question for you, though. What would you say the relative value you're providing as an employee to North End Motor Sales?
I would say
it's a used car dealership in Worcester.
0.
Right.
Right.
So you can kind of see how that's sort of a tension of what we're saying.
He doesn't understand this concept that it's really just a question of how much profit. Now, there are instances, of course, where you run a business where you're barely taking any profit whatsoever, and a minimum wage, you can't exploit, you can't create that much of a delta, as much of a delta as you want between the productivity of your workers and what you pay them. There are businesses like that. Now, of course, what is also problematic with those is things like your rent. Maybe your rent is actually the problem here. Maybe your other fixed costs, or maybe you have a bad business idea, or maybe you don't have access to other forms of capital.
But the point is, you shouldn't be allowed to ship that onto your workers.
And not only that, which is true, but we know that the minimum wage, as it has been historically there, has been able to create productivity and economic growth in the past. Here is where the value of the minimum wage. Well, here, do the other one, that one, yeah. So if you go back to the 1960s, you will see here from this chart that the minimum wage kept pace with where the economy was. And then starting somewhere probably around that same time, 1970 some odd, it dips. It doesn't keep pace with productivity. This is just another way of looking at that same chart, except for instead of this being the delta between productivity and compensation, now we're just looking at it relative to the minimum wage. If the minimum wage was maintained from where it was last in 1968, the minimum wage has been around since 1938, I think it was, and has been raised periodically, maybe about a dozen times over the years. If it had kept pace with productivity, in other words, if that dynamic, which worked for so many years, from 1944 in this chart, I guess, through to 1973 worked. And I would remind you, we had great, massive economic expansion during that period of time, and we had it broadly shared, at least amongst white people.
Largely due to wars, but it's beside the point.
Well, there was also just a broadening of the middle class. You could argue that's a function of like the rest of the world rebuilding. There's an argument you could make for a bunch of those things. But that starts going south in 1968, I guess it was, where you start to see the minimum wage not keeping nearly at the pace of what productivity is. And let's look at the other chart, which again just simply proves the point that there is no dynamic where an employer says like, well, you're worth $12 to me in terms of my revenue here. And therefore, I'm going to pay you 10. We're always going to have a dynamic of 5/6. That's the iron law of compensation. You're going to get, I'm going to get, you're going to get 5/6 of the productivity that you make. And the problem with that is that that's a fantasy. It doesn't exist because we have seen evidence that it has moved instead of 5/6 to 5/7,
Again,
5/8, 5/9.
Oh my God.
Just to be intellectually honest and fair, how we correlate this though with the fact that, no offense, Brendan, that Brendan is worth nothing to McDonald's as an employee right now. So how do we sort of figure out that tension?
Here's another way of looking at that same thing. The ratio of minimum wage to average hourly wage for private production and non-supervised works. It has basically steadily dropped significantly over the years. Now, it bumps up in times of economic peril. 2008, you can see there's a little jag there, but still significantly less than it was in the late 40s. So there it is. I mean, there it is with statistics. This is not for Matt Walsh. This is for everyone else who has a more than just passing rudimentary notion, high school, junior high school notion of how people are paid. In his earlier video, and I noticed he didn't address this here, maybe we missed it, he said if you work at McDonald's and you do a really good job, you'll get a raise. As if there are people, do we have that? Oh, okay. Let's see.
Oh, there's more.
How much, how much you're worth to your employer. My contention about that fast food worker is that based on the effort and the skill he brings to the table, his financial worth to his employer is minimal. And the reason it's minimal is that almost anyone could do what he does. Almost anyone could replace him. They could fire him, and there's a 99% chance that whoever walks in the door next, however old they are, they could be 6 years old, they could do what that guy does. So he's just not worth that much financially to his employer. And importantly here, the automated things that McDonald's, that they already have set up, that thing can do what that guy does and do it better, actually. Now, that could change. Here's the good news. He has the power to change it. He could come to work tomorrow, energetic, on the ball, helpful, involved, engaged, on time, ready to work, making the customers feel good, upselling, doing all this stuff. He could do that tomorrow, and instantly, just like that, in an instant, he could be worth considerably more than $1 an hour.
Pause it. Last week we had on the show a woman who spent time working at Amazon, working at McDonald's, working at a call center, and she wrote the book. What was the name? What was the?
On the Clock.
On the Clock.
Emily Gundelsberger.
Can I fit anything else into this box? I just want to upsell it.
She worked at McDonald's, and there is no. First of all, not only instantaneously do you become not more worth to your employer? The last thing an employer would do, like, you know what, yesterday you were lazy. Today you're great. I'm giving you a raise to do the same job. That doesn't happen at McDonald's. It doesn't happen at all at McDonald's. It doesn't happen over time at McDonald's. There's no two people working the fryolator and who have been working there for the same time and one's getting paid more. That's not the way it works at McDonald's. And it's also not the case that they're paying just for the skill set. They're paying based upon how much labor is available to me, not the quality of it. How much labor is available to me that can do this, and how much control do I have, monopsony, over their wages? One of the big dynamics that we have that's problematic in this country, and I know this is a little bit far afield from minimum wage, is that we have such concentration of corporate power in this country. You have far fewer firms starting up, far less employers, and what happens is you get single buyers for labor in localities, and then to some extent nationally, and that drives down wages, which again is more proof that wages are not a function of the value you bring. Yes, there is a baseline that you have to bring in terms of value to someone to get hired, but wages are not merely a function of the value you bring to the employer. There's a lot of other factors. So his whole argument about why a minimum wage is wrong is fallacious.
I've said it before and I'll say it again. There's nothing worse than unearned pedantry.
Indeed. Indeed. Let's go to the IMs. If you had to work, Wendy, if you had to work more than one job to have a roof over your head or food on the table, you probably shouldn't have taken that job that's not paying enough. That'd be a you problem. That's according to Ben Shapiro. Right. Jonathan Armstead. 2 days on the way home, I was in the subway stop and saw a person reading Jordan Peterson, 12 Rules for Life. I walked by and yelled, "Put that book down and clean up your room." A coworker asked what that meant, and I explained who that was. She looked at the rules and yesterday told me that based on Peterson's own rules, he is a horrible person. His transgender phobia ignores Rule 9. Assume that the person you're listening to might know something you don't. That's how stupid his philosophy is. Someone can poke holes in it in a 30-second Google search on their iPhone.
Has anyone heard from Jordan Peterson lately?
I think he's taking a break.
I feel like Zizek literally destroyed him with facts and logic.
Zizek did him a body blow, but there's some things in the work for the fall.
Thames Darwin. Sam, I'm heading to Barbados tomorrow for a week with the lovely Mrs. Darwin to celebrate my 50th birthday, which falls on a Friday. Since I won't be able to listen to MR, then can I get a birthday shofar and maybe a little bit of love from right-wing Mandela? Go.
Enjoy your time in Barbados while you corrupt and pollute another island with your cosmopolitan values and lack of patriotism.
Calling from a 716 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 716.
Hey, Sam.
Yes.
Hey, Sam.
Yes.
Calling from Dan from New York.
Dan from New York. What's on your mind, Dan?
Well, I'm just wondering if the Democrats are ever going to step up and really pick up this fight, because they seem to be weak in almost every way, and I hear you talking about it every time I listen, and I'm just a little disappointed in them, and I'm wondering if they're going to step up and represent the party that they're supposed to, the party of the working class and the party of the people.
What, in any specific on any specific topic, or are you just talking generally?
Well, in general, and I know that over the past couple of years, I've heard you talk about why aren't the Democrats fighting? Why aren't the Democrats bringing up things? Why isn't Nancy Pelosi saying anything? Why isn't Chuck Schumer doing anything? And I think it's just a trend of weakness, and I'm a little bit worried about what's going to happen in the upcoming election.
Well, I'm worried about what's going to happen in the upcoming election. I am in a constant state of worry. I would say that I don't think whatever it is that you're expecting or hoping for from this generation of leadership in the Democratic Party, I don't think we're going to get. I think that
Go
there
to
is
Joe 30330.
Oh God. I do think that if you wanted to be optimistic, you could find some optimism in the younger generation of the party and in sort of the rise of folks like Bernie Sanders and even I think to a certain extent Elizabeth Warren as well, and
Queen
just where
AOC.
they have, yeah, exactly, and how they've been able to pull the party not just pull the party to the left, but they have a different perspective on how to fight, how to work politics. Now, I don't know.
Well, hang on a second. Let me ask you.
Well, let me just finish this. I don't know if Nancy Pelosi. Okay. I don't know if Nancy Pelosi is just bad at politics or is actually good at politics and just has a radically different set of political ideas than I would want her to have.
It's the latter.
It could
All right,
be.
can I ask
It could be, but we're not. But I think it's a little bit of both, and probably largely irrelevant because either way, they got to go.
All right, I want to ask a quick question. I was listening. I don't know if it was yesterday or the day before when Jeff from Georgia called, and he said that the party is going to resist becoming the party of the working class because they fear an activated and an active working class set of voters. And I think it was might have been Jamie that agreed with Jeff from Georgia. Sometimes I hear a voice in the background and I'm not sure. I think Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, I think the Democrat establishment, even though they could handily win by activating working class voters, they fear an activated working class because it would tend to upend the establishment.
I think they probably fear anybody who would in some way be a threat to their power. Yes. And so, I think my sense was in the 2016 election that they were trying to fashion a presidential win with a coalition that involved these Republican, Republicans in the suburbs. And they thought they had it. And it turned out they didn't. And I think,
you're right.
I think that they fear, I don't know that they say it so explicitly, but I think that anything that strikes them as losing, their power in some fashion, yes, I think is problematic. I don't know how deep their assessment of it is, but I think they're allergic to that without a doubt.
You just have to follow the money. I'm going to answer this because you said my name caller. Thank you.
Yes.
Like the Democratic and the Republican parties, not to sound too adbusters about it, but they are the left and right wings of neoliberal capitalism at the moment. And actually we did a
Bingo.
really good, yeah, hell yeah. We did, well, I wasn't in it, but Sean did a History is a Weapon episode with Matt Crispin from Chapo Trap House, where they talk about why the U.S. never had a workers' party like other countries have, like most of the European countries. The Democratic Party was always this bizarre cross-class coalition. So if we want to really realign it into something, and they have to do this weird dance, right? They pretend to fight for the working class but that's only part of the coalition. So they also have to represent the interests of the bosses, which are diametrically opposed to the interests of the workers, et cetera, et cetera. So if we really want to realign the party and redraw the electoral map in a way that will A, win, and B, fight for progressive reforms for real instead of pretending they want to, but actually not, actively standing in the way in many cases. We need a new coalition, and the moneyed interests that fund them right now cannot be part of it. Like, it's fine if people with money, if rich people, if bosses want to vote for Bernie Sanders, we'll take it. But we cannot be pandering and catering to their interests.
All right, Sam, I have two more things.
Oh, God.
One, I'm afraid might offend you, and the second is more of a personal request that might go off the grid.
Take your time, caller, and be very detailed. Ignore all of Sam's discomfort.
Right,
when he's frustrated, that means he wants to hear more.
Some truth to that.
Okay, is he frustrated?
No, go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead,
Dan. Let's go.
All right, thanks. The first is, I pay for a membership to the Majority Report. I don't pay a membership to Jimmy Dore, but I listen to both. And I've heard you really razz on Jimmy Dore, but there's one thing that he said that I think rings true. And if I started, I almost bet you could finish the phrase because I've heard you guys razz on him all the time.
Dan, let me say this. I hope there's at least one thing that he says that's true.
Okay, let me try this then. Let's see what you think.
I'm suspect of
he
that.
Constantly says the Democrats would rather lose to Trump than win with a progressive. Have you heard him say that?
I know he said that. I think that's true for maybe some of them. Like, I think maybe a guy like Horse Whisperer who works for Exxon and Eli Lilly and whatnot.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
He's a clown.
I think it's true for him. But do I think that's true for the vast majority of Democrats? Do I think that's true for more than 75% of the Democrats? Absolutely not.
Okay, what about, like, say, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer?
I don't know about Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. I don't know. I mean, I think we can test that proposition, but there's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, we can. We can.
There's no doubt in my mind that yes, there are some Democrats who are like, I've lived through 4 years of Trump. I got my tax cuts, probably they would say, I would have to guess. And they are afraid of someone like Bernie Sanders. I think maybe even you could probably find a small subset that would also be afraid of Elizabeth Warren. I mean, there's no doubt.
Yeah, true.
But you know what? There was supposedly, a lot of Republicans who said, like, I would rather, have Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump. I mean, none of that should be a surprise.
I think I want to say, I think I'll meet somewhere in the middle, but anybody that was on the list of that New York Times meeting reporting that came out in April of, meetings with Neera Tanden and Nancy Pelosi and Pete Buttigieg was at some of them that were literally specifically focused on stopping Bernie Sanders. I don't know if I would necessarily say that all the people in those meetings would prefer Trump to Bernie. That's a jump, but they are certainly people who are deranged enough to, be conspiring against Bernie at a time when, frankly, they could support their own candidates and just move forward and think about a general election.
Yes,
there is a number of people.
Show me the political party though that is not going to be that is not going to try and lie against someone who is threatening to completely upset the apple cart.
No doubt about that, and it's important for people to recognize.
And the fact, I would say this: the fact that there's such a concerted effort to stop Bernie
is a good sign.
Indicates to me that the problem they realize is that we've got to support him in the general over Trump. I mean,
well, there's also, I think there's also, I think the big thing to watch is the degree and the intensity. Like there was a lot of people who, and I think this might actually change when Britain goes for elections, but in 2017, people like Tony Blair were like, I vote Labor. I always vote Labor. As in, yes, I'm going to vote for Jeremy Corbyn. But they did everything they could to undermine that performance to the point where they clearly would prefer a conservative win.
And look, we know that, what was it, 25% of Clinton voters did not vote for Barack Obama in 2008. And so this is a dynamic that's not, people, I think there was 12% of Bernie people who last time didn't support Clinton. So there's always going to be a segment of a part. Look, you tell me, like, how many people do you hear threaten not to vote for Joe Biden over Donald Trump? Look, that dynamic exists. It exists, on all different sides. If somebody invited me to a meeting on how to stop Joe Biden, I'd go. You know what I mean? Like, I'd go.
Yeah, me too.
Is there nosh at the meeting?
So one thing the party could do, though, is get over its romance with people like Mike Bloomberg and Ana Navarro, who would absolutely not vote for Bernie over Trump.
I actually have to say,
they put him on
I have
stage
no
at the
defense,
convention.
no defense of Michael Bloomberg. I hate Michael Bloomberg. I'll put my dislike of him against anybody. That clip that was going around of Bloomberg not committing to endorse everybody, I have to say, by Bloomberg standards, was shockingly open.
I think Bloomberg is going to pull a trigger for
when Michael Bloomberg
I think he'll
said every single person in the Democratic field running for president is better than Trump.
Yeah,
that was. That's more unequivocal than you will hear from people who have superficially better reputations.
When you
say
look, they invited Michael Bloomberg to the convention. It was stupid. It was dumb. And it was like they thought they were being cute by half, and et cetera, et cetera. But when you talk about like the Democratic Party's embrace of Ann Navarro, like I would bet you that 90
people like her.
Okay, well, but like whom? Like, I think like the point is like
suburban moderates. That famous quote from our friend Chuck Schumer.
Yeah,
Right.
suburban
Well, that was my
moderates.
point. Is I think they were trying to fashion I think the Democratic leadership was trying to fashion a win.
And how'd that go for them?
It blew up in their face. And so, I mean, I think what I take issue with is this notion of the Democrats. The Democrats in 15 years could easily be AOC and Justice Democrats throughout the leadership.
Oh, and we'll be talking about them differently then.
Maybe, hopefully.
I think easily might be a jump, because I think the establishment Democrats are going to fight it tooth and nail.
Of course. Nobody wants to give up power. Of course.
This whole part of politics I get confused about.
I've taken up a lot of your time. I have an education thing for you. Next year is going to be my 20th year teaching in public schools in New York. Now, I'm a little bit north of you. I'm out in a rural area, but I have to tell you that I appreciate the hell out of everything you say about schools, about education, about public schools, and education reform. I think you've really got your head on right about those things. And being a father of 3 beautiful girls, 2 of whom are off to college and one who's still got a few years left in high school, I'd like to get a chance to ask you about your experiences as a parent trying to find the right schools for your kids, and what you did about it in an urban setting, because I do some writing that I put on different locations, and I just don't know what it's like to be a parent in a city trying to find the right school for my kids.
Well, I will say this, that in the Brooklyn district that we live with a great elementary school, although it's become a lot less diverse in the past probably 10 years. The middle schools varied, and when my daughter applied for middle school, they had a system that was just horrible. It made the kids compete against each other. You had to go in. Some of them that she had to have interviews. These are all public schools, and they now in District 15 in Brooklyn, it's lottery based, which is much better. Now the only problem with it is that, but the only problem is some kids may have to travel further than others. It's just you may end up not going to the school that's right next to your neighborhood. But I think that's the only good way to do it in terms of providing as much diversity as you possibly can. In high school, she applied to 15 different high schools. And my daughter sings. She auditioned. She got into LaGuardia. But she was like, I don't want to travel an hour each way on the subway every day, hour and 10 minutes, and sing opera for 3 hours. And so she ended up going to another very solid school that was a lot more economically and socially diverse. And there's still a good, music program there too. So it's hard. It's a lot of work. And I frankly don't know, my former wife and I, we I don't know, spent hundreds of dollars on taking courses that provide us with here's how to apply to these schools. Here's a list of really good schools, and getting on email lists and this and that. We both have the money to afford to a babysitter when we go to one of these talks. We have the money to join these things. I think it's extremely challenging. And what we really need to do is just build as many good schools as possible. And that means really basically addressing poverty in a large aspect.
If only getting your kid into a good school was as easy as being a cock. No extra charge. Boom!
But things like universal pre-K, I think, is huge. And I would even take it a year younger. Because if you do that and you provide a quality pre-K situation, you're going to see huge improvements, I think, in schools across the board. Well,
Sam, I want to thank you. I want to thank you because your experience is vastly different than mine out here in the country, where I've pretty much spent my whole life, where your school is the school that you have, whatever is serving your community. And even though you have had to bust your ass you've avoided the bad teacher, failing school, evil unions talk that a lot of education reformers have clutched.
Yeah. Well, there's been some of that. I mean, the schools that my kids have gone to, fortunately, have been sort of on the vanguard of protesting about high stakes testing and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, the place I grew up, it was more or less like that too. I mean, we had 4 high schools in the city, and you went to the one that you live near. But the bottom line is the way that we fund education in this country is a proxy for basically how we could segregate schools, and that's a problem.
Yes, exactly. Segregation.
I appreciate the
All right,
call,
well,
Dan.
Sam, thank you for your time.
Thanks.
Oh, he didn't have anything more?
There was nothing.
There wasn't anything else he would like to explore.
You didn't get terribly critical. All right, we got time for
that guy
one
was
more.
pretty sharp.
One more caller calling from a 682 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, is this me?
Yes, it is you.
Yeah, I was originally going to call to satirize Jimmy Dore.
Okay.
But then you started talking about Matt Walsh, and then the last guy brought up Jimmy Dore, so I'm going to satirize him anyways.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to skip the satire, and we're just going to get to the point. Anyone who's still listening to him, they just need to know whenever he says that he's an idiot and he knows something, whenever he figured out, when he figured out that he's an idiot, so that means everyone else has to know it. He's being a complete hypocrite whenever he's calling on other people gaslighting. So I had a funny story to satirize that, but I'm not going to. Anyways, the second thing is yesterday you had a caller from Nebraska.
Yeah.
Talking about why doesn't Bernie go to Nebraska and do a speech there about rural America? Well, he had a speech in Osage, Iowa in May, and he has a plan that's the Revitalizing Rural America plan. So I just wanted to point that out.
All right, people can check
and
it
then
out.
also regarding Matt Walsh, I'd like to hear his plan on how do people pay for whenever they cost the company money. So when a fund manager who normally does get paid based on the percentage of his production, what happens whenever they lose millions of dollars for a company? So that's it.
Good point. Appreciate the call. All right, folks, that's it for our calling option portion of the program. I'm going to read a couple of IMs, and then we'll get out of here. Waterboat from Kashmir. The Kashmir issue is a symptom of a larger problem of fascism that India has. The scraping of Kashmir's autonomy is the inciting incident of the next act, which has begun. Fascism is a global phenomenon. India has 1 billion people. Anyone who thinks that the fascist takeover in India is not their concern is being a racist, because brown fascism is still fascism and accelerating in India.
Also not interested in one's own survival, if you look at it from a...
Well, he goes, this will come back and
Also-
bite humanity in a big way very soon.
Right.
The effects of climate change also are pretty apparent there, no? I mean, I don't know about as much about it.
I
as
don't know how
Michael
much they
does.
play into the question of Kashmir.
It plays into it's a gentrification. It's a massive tourism and housing market opportunity because it changes residency rules. That's a big part of it too. But anyways,
I am good at sex. You're bad at sex. David Frum thinks Trump is a Marxist. Putin on the fritz.
Yeah, that was hilarious.
Putin on the fritz. I found this interesting. I rarely get into political arguments online, but I got into it with an either pretty hardcore member of the Yang Gang or a member of his campaign's social media team on Reddit over his version of UBI. I'd love to say that I came up with some original arguments, but for the most part, I'm just parroting what you guys said about it to him. To my surprise, the guy fully called me on it, saying the dismantling of the social safety net is also wrong and it's puppeted by people here who put way too much faith into a very biased Sam Seder. It is unbelievable the how much I am trafficked, I think, in these arguments. But you got to give it to the Yang people for their social media savvy. I mean, I think to a certain extent, they really need to find someone who has more value to them in terms of their argument. But I mean, look, we've made it quite clear. The problem is he went on Dave Rubin and basically gave up the ghost.
And he doesn't support a minimum wage increase, for God's sake.
Retcon. I've been talking to everybody I can and we also missed the whole climate change thing.
I did that on my show, and it was funny because Burgess sent it to me because I totally missed it.
We
All
missed
of a sudden,
it
I was
during-
playing it, and he's just like, "You can take your $1,000, move to higher ground." I was like, "What?
Wait a second.
That was amazing." And Brendan caught it. We missed it.
Yeah. I've been talking to everyone I can about who they're going to vote for, and even people who think Bernie is kind of radical say they're going to vote for him. People in their 20s, 30s, and up in their 60s. I know this isn't scientific, but it made me feel so much better. Well, we'll see. Colorado guy. Have any candidates talked about legislation that would give financial assistance or debt forgiveness to families or individuals with high amounts of medical debt now? Yes, I think actually, I don't know about that.
So I quote tweeted, we'll see. I'll say this is public, and it was kind of funny. When Bernie first announced their, the best student loan forgiveness plan, I quote tweeted it and I said, this is groundbreaking, this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. Let's do it. Next step, medical debt relief. And Josh Orton, who's Bernie Sanders' advisor, a Sam Seder alum, tweeted back at me like a thinking face emoji, kind of implying like that. I think that's on deck.
That's very possible. Secret identity politics, the neoliberal language of people serving the economy rather than the other way around, finally makes its way to immigration talk. Melts my brain a bit. Also, what is common sense supposed to be? Loose left Cody. I'm waiting on hold and I can't hear Sam. Majoritard. I just saw the full animation of the Fun Half song and realized there's a reference to caller Brenda's cinematic vision for the Rand Paul lawn incident. Brilliant.
That's amazing. That's a
pick that
layered.
All right, three more. Leon Grotsky. Hey, Sam, any thoughts on Portnoy telling sitting Congressman AOC that he'd be willing to break national labor laws and fire unionizing employees on the spot? Yes. He's about to lose a labor fight, right. I think. Matthew, the app is having problems. And the final I am a day, all else. Does Hunt a Killer have a case where you try and find out Epstein's killer yet? Interesting idea. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.